I'd like to start this Sunday message with a story that illustrates a dynamic within human consciousness for freedom, really. There was once a man who had a small farm on which he kept a few farm animals, chickens, goats, and a milk cow and her calf. The calf was a young bull, and soon after he was born, he showed signs of being very stubborn. Each night, the man struggled to pull the calf into the barn by the halter, attaching a rope and pulling him safely inside and away from the threat of the wolves that roamed the land at night. And as time went on and the young bull grew, so did his stubborn insistence to stay outdoors at night. The man struggled to pull him inside, a game of tug-of-war that left the man swearing and sweating every night. And one evening, the man had met his match with the growing young bull. Try as he might, the animal would not budge another foot, not far from the barn door. The man pulled and pulled, but the stubborn animal held his ground. And then the man had an idea. He walked around to the opposite side of the bull. Facing the barn door and the bull, who then became confused by this change in position, turned to face him. Then the man began to pull just as before, and the young bull began to pull just as before, and with each pull, taking a few steps backward on his legs until his resistance had backed him safely into the barn. This is an example of paradox. The man discovered that by totally reversing his angle or position with the young steer and working with instead of against both of their natures, he increased the rewards gleaned from the situation, and his animals safely tucked away for another night without a fight. Well, sometimes we're like the bull. And it's interesting on the spiritual path, we have a desire for rewards and for positive results. But what do we do with our resistance around our spiritual path? For years and years, I've worked not only personally within my own life, but with people. And there is this resistance that we feel. But we can use the power of paradox to change that, just as the man did with the bull. Paradox is defined as a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement that, when explained, may prove to be well-founded in truth. And I was looking for some examples about paradox, and I came across a statement by an Irish poet named Oscar Wilde. He said, "I can resist anything but temptation." An example of a paradoxical statement. And people in my position, in my vocation, have for hundreds or if not thousands of years asked people to resist temptation. And with mixed results. Even if I'm encouraging people to develop a spiritual practice or meditation, we might get bullish on that. So I would like to offer something for all of us here today. Don't resist temptation anymore. Don't do it. Let yourself off the hook. Get wild. Just do whatever you want to do. How's that sound? Instead of running from temptation, I would like to offer us something else. somewhat of a paradox in and of itself. Instead of running from temptation, how about if we run towards truth? Run towards truth. Well, sometimes easier said than done. There's another statement that's paradoxical. Truth is honey, which is bitter. Truth is honey, which is bitter. So I asked within myself, what is the bitter part of the truth? And I want to answer that by another statement that's paradoxical. You must lose yourself to find yourself. Isn't that an interesting place to stand? And how is it that we're supposed to lose ourselves to find ourselves? Does that mean that we're supposed to let go of our individuality to somehow join into a greater body of water, like a puddle on the floor if we were a drop, to not have our own selfhood anymore? No. As a matter of fact, what is necessary is to let go of our resistance so that we can be greater in our individuality. And that's somewhat paradoxical in and of itself. To let go of our resistance so that we may join into a greater individuality of ourselves. So what we're actually being asked to do on the spiritual path is nothing more than letting go of our resistance. Resistance to a greater life, a greater self. And therein lies this whole part of allowing, giving permission for ourselves to become one with, to merge with that which calls us in our hearts. And there was a statement or a reading by Marianne Williamson back in the early 90s that is probably quite familiar to most people in this room. It was familiar to me. But it is still as fresh and necessary as anything that we have on our plate. In terms of the spiritual life, it will probably be quite familiar to you. But she wrote, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, even though we do feel inadequate at times. I know I do. But our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And that oftentimes in our life we hide from our own power because of whatever, this, that, or the other. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Why would our light frighten us? Why do we desire to stay small? We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant or generous or talented or fabulous? Actually, who are we not to be that? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give permission for others to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I think I've worked with resistance my whole life. How about you? I mean, we have read and studied and gone here and gone there and traveled to sacred sites, and still we have this resistance within us that we deal with. And I ask myself, what is required? What is required? Well, it came from the book that Marion Williamson wrote, this statement: a return to love. A return to love. Sometimes we're afraid of love. Sometimes we're afraid that it'll go away if we extend ourselves to another person, or we allow ourselves to be loved, or to even love ourselves enough. But it is the divine prescription of life to allow ourselves to be loved. I came across another paradoxical statement that actually was the genesis of developing this talk for this week, and it came from the Daily Word from last week. In the absence of certainty, anything is possible. In the absence of certainty, anything is possible. You and I need certainty on a human level, do we not? And yet we need it in all types of different situations, like if you and I were in a boat and we were heading towards a shore, we would need some form of certainty around our navigational plot so that we wouldn't hit rocks on the bottom and destroy our boat. We would need at least 5 easy steps to certainty. But in looking at the word paradox, it comes from Greek and Latin. Para meaning outside, and dox comes from the word dokein, which means thinking. So it's outside thinking that we actually gain certainty. And so that requires us to surrender. Not something that humans are really good at. Because we feel somehow that surrender has something to do with losing control or someone else taking control of us. But in a spiritual sense, what is required is surrendering our resistance to a greater idea. I have a very, very strong knowing, a felt knowing that God mind, divine mind, holds within its idea or within its consciousness an idea of us that is so much more profound than we give our permission for. And that within that consciousness of divine mind, we can claim it for ourselves. And I can give you an example of this. Because surrender really requires humility. Last night, I was in bed around 1 a.m., woke up, and my mind was just churning with all types of fear-based thoughts, as sometimes you may experience yourself. And I started to say to every area in my life, every situation, every circumstance, I love you. Please forgive me. Thank you. What was the other one? This is very important. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. When I said that, at first it was just a mental construct, and then I just kept saying it over and over and over until I started to feel it. And then I felt this amazing rush of energy that moved through my body. It was like right there. It was waiting for me to let go of my resistance. And I felt tremendous peace come over me. This is the power of the divine. It is omnipresent. It is with us in this very room right now. If we give ourselves permission to let go of our resistance to it. This is why there's this continuous conversation around get out of your mind and get into your heart. This is the chapter in human evolution right now over the last, I would say, 25 years of moving out of the mind, because basically everything has been said on the level of the mind around spirituality. Now it's time to claim and give permission and to let go of our resistance so that we may be filled with the presence of God, to experience the joy, to experience the love of all of the images that you see in this place right now around the holidays. Even the wreath, joining in a circle of self, not a linear path at all, but a circle of moving out from God and coming back and reuniting with God. You see it in indigenous spirituality with the sacred hoop, or in lots of different expressions. The circle is coming back home to oneself. But it is a requirement to let go of our thinking. And I feel that this situation happened last night in the wee hours of the morning, so that there would be a proving that I could share with you this morning. Because the divine, call it the oversoul or my Christ self or your Christ self or whatever it is that we want to call it, it is so intimately one with us. And through the power of grace, it has this wholehearted desire for us to be free, to let go of our resistance. It was interesting, on the American Thanksgiving on Thursday, we were down in Portland. My wife and I went down to my son-in-law's home and shared that event with them. And their friends are very, very intelligent people. They work for IT corporations and scientists and everything like that. And I was just having a conversation with this one young man, maybe in his early 30s. And they're just doing their life, just the millennial type of doing life. It was beautiful how they were doing it. But I also noticed a level of distraction, that they were, caught up in the mind of the world. And I worked with just continuing to ask questions because they asked me. I never force any of my views on anybody, but if they open a conversation, I feel that it's a spirit-guided thing. And I could tell that this one young man was thinking very deeply about the level of soul that I was speaking to. I could see that he and his wife, who were sitting right there, were starting to open. And we were having this conversation, and it became more and more intimate. And the other people in the room knew that we were having this conversation, but they didn't want to go there. It wasn't time. It wasn't time for them to have that conversation. And it was okay. But when it came time to say goodnight, I went up to this one young man and I shook his hand and I said, "It's really nice talking with you." And he says, "You have no idea what opened in me." It's very important to him. And I'm not patting myself on the back around that. It was an opening that we both opened to. So, to lose ourself, to find ourself, is about letting go of resistance. Because there really is, in the dynamics of being a human being, there is a small self, personal self, and there is a big self. And that may seem very simplistic to you, but it's really not. It's removing all of the spiritual materialism around doing certain rituals and showing up in a certain way in order for us to approach this presence. Because last night I was just laying in bed going, basically, I'm so tired of this state of mind. And so I started to say, "I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you." And you can speak this to yourself and to anybody else that you have issues with in your life. And it's magic. Because it gives permission for the love to flow. And I felt it move through me like if I was standing in the shower, just flowing through. It was so close. And I really feel that people desire to have a felt knowing, a real experience. And sometimes that requires us to really kind of get up against it, you know, of a place of ultimate resistance. And then it's like, let go. Let go and let God. So the self, with a capital S, is how the divine holds us. It sees us in that. And the small self, I don't know if it even sees it. But we do. And it's ours to surrender it. I could encourage you to step up your meditation practice. But you might get bullish. You might dig in your heels. But all I always like to say, if you choose your homecoming work, if you choose to accept it, because that's really important, to honor you on your path, and not make anything that any of us are doing wrong. But it's just simply coming to a choice point of recognizing our own resistance so that we may let it go and choose, as I mentioned a moment ago, the big self over the small self. And what happens is that the big self loves the little self and joins with it, and the two become one. In the book of John, there is this element within the teachings. In that day, you will know that I am in my Father, and I am in you, and you are in me. This is letting go of the resistance. This is saying yes to the essence of what all of this holiday is about. So I'm grateful that we are together in this room right now, and that perhaps there is a opening within your consciousness, going deeper into your own inner truth. Thank you.